So thanks again for joining all. Quick introduction on who do we have on the panel today. I would like to present Kata Bors, who is the Global Associate Director of Client Communications for South Pole. Then we have Carolyn Fisher, the Managing Consultant for Climate Labels, and as well Emily Tan, the UK and Regional Manager for CDP, and obviously myself who will be hosting the session as Associate Director, Global Solution Marketing as well for South Pole. I would like to proceed to the next slide where we have a few housekeeping rules. So all the microphones are default on mute, questions at the end, and the full session will be recorded. Then what's on the agenda for today? We are now in the welcome and introduction. Then the next bit is answering the question, what is credible climate action? Then we're gonna proceed into building credible climate claims. And lastly, introducing the funding climate action label. And at the end, there's 10 minutes for Q&A. But first, let's start with a bit more about South Pole, who we are and where we're coming from. So South Pole is pretty much already there for 70 years and has award-winning innovative solutions, especially in the sustainability area. Very known for their project development. It's pretty much the largest developer of emission reduction, avoidance and removal projects globally. And it has a rich and diverse team of experts all around the globe. We have about 30 offices and 1,300 plus sustainability advisors, scientists, engineers, and leading experts on the different fields we operate in. Then if you look at this slide, you can see that we have pretty much offices on a lot of places in the world. We have sort of 40 local offices and representation. And without further ado, I would like to pass the hand over to Emily, who's going to introduce CDP and credible claim action.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone. It's good to be here. So today I'm going to go over, how companies can use target setting or science-based target setting to demonstrate credible climate action in your strategy. Next slide, please. So a bit of background, the SBTI was founded by 4 partner organizations, of which CDP is one of them. And SBT, Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI, is one of 12 low carbon initiatives of the Women Business Coalition. So, this was started around 2015 when the Paris Agreement happened. And, SBTI has grown a lot in the past 2 years, especially since the net zero standard was launched around COP26, and now it's kind of taken a life of its own, to become recognized as global best practice, for having ambitious climate targets that are aligned with science. Next slide, please. So when we talk about science-based targets, there are 2 types of targets that we can think of. It's broken down into near-term target, which are 5 to 10-year targets, as well as long-term targets, which should be no later than 2050. So these 2 targets help companies to align with the trajectory towards goals of the Paris Agreement to halve emissions by 2030 and reach net zero no later than 2050. And in a very easy way to understand it is to show how much and how fast companies need to decarbonize in order to align with science and help to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. And we also ask companies to disclose progress on targets on an annual basis in a public manner to provide that transparency. Next slide, please. So this is a typical journey of companies can expect when they join SBTI. So the first step is to have a public commitment by signing the commitment letter. And so after signing the letter, a company typically has 24 months to develop and submit your targets, for validation. And once a company's targets have been validated, a company is then also expected to publish that target and disclose on progress towards that target on an annual basis. Again, in a public manner. And it's also, the guidance from SBTI for companies to review your targets at once every 5 years at a minimum to ensure that, the targets stay relevant to your company, because maybe, companies have a lot of changes sometimes due to mergers and acquisitions, or if you have used a different data set and your baseline changes, etc. And it's also to ensure that companies align with the best practice or, the latest criteria set by the SBTI. So this process is, all the communication has guidance from the SBTI on how to use the right language to communicate the status, of where your company is at in the journey. And for SME companies, the first step of commitment is not relevant because SME companies can set targets for scopes 1 and 2 for near-term targets, or across all scopes for net zero straight away. Next slide, please. So science-based targets are, you can see them as a way to mark a milestone or a long-term goal for companies that are looking to decarbonize your business, in a transition journey. So CDP, helps to provide a framework for companies to provide that disclosure and alignment on, not just emissions in your inventory, but also a plan and alignment with different metrics, in global frameworks like TCFD and the upcoming ISSB, to also consider things like governance and strategy. So science-based targets can help to drive the level of ambition required in these transition plans, and it also provides a bit of guidance on companies' own internal conversations with your stakeholders on how much capital to invest and make that transition to low carbon operating model a reality. Next slide, please. So the next part, I want to talk a bit about SBTI's net zero standard because it's quite relevant to today's topic, and elements of net zero standard does push companies to go beyond your value chain emissions as well. Next slide, please. So taking half a step back, the reason why the net zero standard was developed was a response to the market's inconsistency on what companies mean when they have net zero targets in place, or when companies claim to be carbon neutral, or other terminology that companies claim. So the criticism on all these like various claims or targets the companies set for themselves come from a few different areas. There was a lack of standardization across what boundary the targets include. So companies looking at scope 3, which are 11 times of what a company's own operational emissions are. What is the interim steps that companies are taking on the way to reach net zero, and what kind of mitigation methods are companies using. One of the key criticism, of offsetting is also because, a lot of times companies, especially those that claim to be carbon neutral, are using or focusing on offset instead of reducing their own emissions. And then also there was generally a lack of accountability on, what is the status of the company in trying to achieve these targets. So, the net zero standard kind of cut through all of this noise and provide what is meant by best practice. And it also, has the avenue to validate companies on their targets to indicate who is in alignment with these goals. Next slide, please. So, I want to also talk a bit about what makes up, a net zero validation. So earlier I talked about near-term and long-term targets. So for the long-term targets, most companies, for most companies, this would mean, the requirement to reduce emissions across all scopes by minimum of 90% or more. before a company can claim to have reached net zero. And on the way to reaching a company's long-term target, companies are also recommended to provide, investments or activities on beyond value chain mitigation. So actions that take place outside of a company's own value chain. This is really to help drive capital and finance, to enable scaling up of carbon capture technologies, or projects that help to protect forests, etc. And so we recognize that a lot of the emissions in the future will probably need to rely a lot on these technologies. So this is something that SBTi is currently having public consultation on. I will touch on that a bit later as well. But once a company has reached the net zero year, any residual emissions that cannot be abated will also be expected to be neutralized or balanced off, with permanent carbon capture removal, and storage from the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So, to kind of give a bit of focus on what to focus on, right, for the net zero standard, the mitigation hierarchy is what drives, the net zero standard, focusing on abatement first, or reduction of a company's own emissions, followed by going beyond a company's own emissions to invest in beyond value chain mitigation activities, and then finally to neutralize whatever the company is unable to abate themselves. So the common practice in the past was that part of the whole criticism I mentioned earlier. What used to be common practice was that companies would rely on all these beyond value chain mitigation activities, which are sometimes not the most credible. So I think there's a lot of work that is going on in trying to ensure that companies are able to drive capital to the right types of activities which are credible, which have real impacts, which has additionality, to the whole effort towards being able to remove carbon, or reduce the impacts of climate change on a larger scale. Next slide, please. So this is actually my final slide. I look forward to answering any questions anyone has. But this is really just a summary of, if you see the graphic here, it summarizes what the spirit of the BVCM, or Beyond Value Chain Mitigation Guidance in consultation, is about. So there are, 9 topics that are being in consultation for, and it's open until 30th of July. And so, this graphic that I've captured is from step 2, of the overarching process that a company should be keeping in mind when thinking about beyond value chain mitigation. And the first step is already, expecting companies to set net zero targets through the SBTi following the net zero standard. So this is really for companies that already have science-based targets in place and are already working towards reaching those targets, and what other things can they do to go above and beyond target setting. So the other areas that are being discussed in the consultation paper is also around the nature and scale of how companies should be thinking about BVCM, how they deploy resources and financing towards it, and also to disclose how companies should disclose on BVCM and other claims. So if you don't have time to read through the whole document, there is a video introduction which I have linked on this slide. But the overall information is in the first link that I've placed to participate in the consultation. I've placed a QR code if you're interested to scan and go take a look right now. But yeah, I encourage everyone who is interested in this topic to participate in the survey in this consultation. And with that, I thank everyone for your attention, and thank you for having me once again.
Thank you, and I think that's a nice segue to really the agenda and the core of this webinar today. How do we build credible claims? And you might wonder why we have started with decarbonization journey, setting SBTs, because this is basically, and this is really the baseline for companies to earn the right to communicate. So before setting or without setting a credible and foundation for your climate action, there is no way companies should or can communicate about climate action. So that's really basically the first principle that we wanted to highlight. And then basically the question is, what is communications? What are climate claims in the context of companies' climate action? And here we can say, we can describe two key reasons why companies talk about their climate action. And the first one is really critical, because you have to engage the world around you to deploy and realize and progress on your climate journey, on your climate action. Climate strategies look really great on paper, wonderful, huge Excel sheets, a lot of data, but at the end of the day, those strategies are realized by people. And we can only engage with those people if we develop authentic, engaging, interesting, and relevant communication that are also transparent and credible. And the second purpose of communication is for companies to really take credit and reward for what they are doing. After all, we are still operating in a voluntary space. This is something that companies and the societal expectation increasing and make companies engage in climate action, but still it's a voluntary action. So companies need tools to take credit for their actions. And what we see is that if we give them credible and transparent tools, companies are more likely to invest in climate action. I brought you a couple of big shifts that we need to be aware of when building credible climate claims. And the first big shift is this. A couple of years back, or even until last year, climate action and the communications around it was mainly put in the context of voluntary climate action. But as of last year and as of COP27, we gained much more clarity around how future and deployed compliance markets would work. And there is much more clarity and a really lively debate around the role of the private sector, of companies in realizing our shared goals and the Paris Agreement. So what we see now is that the reality and the context in which companies need to communicate their climate action is shifting. Companies need to be aware of this shift, and they need to find credible ways to demonstrate their added value, both in compliance or Paris-aligned markets and world, but also in the voluntary market. The next shift that we see, and we can go to the next slide, is the intensification of scrutiny. In the past couple of years, yes, of course, we've seen headlines around greenwashing, but the last year has given us a headline, a scandal, a dilemma, a debate on a weekly basis. And what we also see is that, of course, greenwashing is not the right thing to do, and scrutiny is really an effective tool to make sure that climate communication or climate claims are transparent and credible. But also, if you look at this slide, what do you see? You only see companies, brands that are at least doing something. The reality and what we see through data that we collect every year by screening more than 70,000 global companies worldwide is that 93% of companies are still doing nothing to address climate change. It means only 7% of companies are doing at least anything. So here the main goal would be to direct that energy, that scrutiny towards the ones that are not doing anything, instead of culpabilizing the ones that already are on a journey. And yes, this is a really difficult journey. This is a long journey. And yes, we need to make sure claims are credible and scrutinize progress. But here is a call to action for all of us to really look into those who have not yet embarked on a climate journey. The next shift is a little different, but really linked to scrutiny. If we go to the next slide, and that's litigation. A couple of years back, we haven't really heard about climate litigation, right? And this year, in the past year, litigation cases across the globe just mushroomed, and there are countries on the map since a couple of years. So new countries like Bulgaria, Turkey, Finland, or China. These countries were not at all active in terms of climate litigation, and what you see is that this map will become much more colorful as we progress in time. And the hotspots have not changed. So big hotspot is the US, the UK, Australia, the Netherlands, or Germany. So a really big attention point for companies is to always comply with local regulations and be aware that climate litigation is a trend, is a shift to be aware of when you are building your climate claims. Every year at South Pole, we do a thorough research of the credibility of claims, of green claims. And this year we have brought you 3 key trends that we saw and that the data showed us. And the first one was credible claims. And by credible claim, we mean science, backed by a science-led decarbonization and beyond value chain mitigation journey. These claims, these credible claims, pay off. Those companies who have reported to CDP, a big majority, over 70%, have maintained or progressed on their scores in the past year, which means that if you take on board genuine and transparent and regular disclosure and communication, you will progress better and faster on your climate journey. The second one is describes a little bit of a broader trend. So when it comes to climate claims in general, so not only focusing on companies who have a transparent disclosure, but on all the companies. In general, corporate climate claims are still flawed, which means that whenever a company puts out a net zero or climate neutrality or any other carbon credit related claim or commitment, only 1/3 is backed up by a science-led climate journey. So that's something which needs to be improved. And the third one relates to front runners and climate conscious companies that are already on their journey. We have seen a very alarming trend among climate conscious companies. And the trend is that even if companies have very credible claims, they back up those claims with a credible and science-led climate journey, they decide not to talk about their climate action. And that phenomenon is called greenwashing. And this is a really, really dangerous trend, because once a company decides to go dark, decides not to engage the world around them, all of a sudden it becomes really, really difficult to progress on the climate journey. It becomes really, really difficult to inspire others, but also scrutinize progress. And this year, there are already studies monetizing the damage done by greenwashing, and leading companies missing out on billions of dollars or euros worth brand equity or brand or company value related to them not addressing climate change through communications. What we also see, and we can go to the next slide, are new words popping up. So besides greenwashing or greenwashing, there is this term identified as greenwishing. And greenwishing is basically when a company wants to do good, they want to do the right thing, but they just somehow underestimate the challenges or the resources needed, and sometimes their commitments are more ambitious than the reality of realizing them. So they sometimes, and that leads to the next term that we see on the slide, sometimes they need to engage in green reversing, which means that I had a target or I had a commitment or a climate claim, but I realized that I cannot be there by the time I committed to. So let me just take a step back and let me recalculate or rewind my commitments and set a much more realistic target. So a lot is happening in this space. And if we go to the next slide, what we see is that the environment is very complex, changing terminology, changing guidance or evolving guidance from international standards, regulation, media scrutiny or policy changes. So companies need to be really, really savvy when communicating their climate action. And by savvy, we mean they need to become transparent, but also intentional about their goals and actions behind. To find your way and to navigate these crossroads and navigate climate claims in 2023, we brought you 5 really simple, actionable steps or criteria that you can champion when it comes to climate communications or building credible claims. And the first one I already mentioned several times is really key to champion transparency, avoiding vagueness at all costs, avoiding lack of proof, always backing up your claims or commitments, and always giving the definition of what you mean by your communication or assets that you publicize. Without transparency, there is a risk of greenwashing or ambiguity or unclarity. The second simple rule of thumb is always be accountable, always build claims with accountability. Recognize your successes, but also recognize your dilemmas, your failures, or your learnings, because this is through learnings and failures how we can progress and improve all together. The third one is more around engagement. So authenticity is a really important criteria when it comes to climate claims. Don't try to speak someone else's language in the corporate terms. Try to stay true to your corporate or brand values and develop your own voice and weave it into your holistic corporate or brand growth narrative. This is how you can really credibly and honestly engage the world around you. And the fourth one is impacts. It's not enough anymore to put out commitments or wishful thinking or ambitions. Of course, we need ambitions, but we much more need action and impact. And we encourage all companies to champion in their communication the real impact and result of their activities. And this year, we have added a fifth one into this mix, and it is really vulnerability. We have seen a couple of brands going out publicly, being vulnerable, being open about the challenges that they face, and it really pays off. It really gets customers, consumers, stakeholders, employees closer to you, and that helps you really engage with them in a transparent and honest way. Learning all about this evolving context, South Pole has been working on a proposal, on a narrative shift in terms of climate claims, and is therefore proposing industry alignment around a new term. And this new term is funding climate action. And basically the role of this new term is twofold. One fold is to move away from ambiguous terms or terms that are prone to greenwashing, carbon neutrality being one of them lately, and find a way to really transparently champion the activities that you are doing. And the second objective of this language is to really detach your progress and commitment on value chain decarbonization with from progress and activities beyond your value chain. We shouldn't mix up anymore the boundaries of these activities, and that's why we engage and encourage companies to be clear about their reductions, but also take a leading role in funding climate action to contribute to global net zero objectives. We have come to this language, to this result through a stakeholder consultation. We have had interviews and screened over 130 NGOs, clients, policy experts on the language, but also 1,500 consumers. And what we see and what we hear as a feedback is that companies really need a way to align their communications to the Paris Agreement and to the overarching language that is emerging from the discussions. And also over 70% is supportive of the claim, which we believe is future-proof because it talks in a way that's compatible with the Paris Agreement. It is simple because it really shows and not just tells what companies do, and also honest because it really distinguishes the activities at the back end of this claim. And finally, what is the reward for companies engaging in credible, transparent climate communication? Well, first of all, they can show to the world that they take action today. And then they are able to protect their brand reputation. It's not enough anymore not to address climate change. It's really a must-have, and it's really a starting point for you to engage with the world around you. The third one with funding climate action and beyond value chain mitigation is that you are able to set an internal price on carbon, and hence you bring the price of carbon within the organization. You put it on your P&L, and all of a sudden business cases or investment cases become much more favorable towards sustainable or low carbon solutions. And the fourth one is, of course, you showcase that you support the global transition to net zero. Companies or countries, by decarbonizing in the Western world, it's not going to be enough just to reach net zero in Switzerland, in Germany, or in France. We need to move the needle in other countries as well, in emerging and developing countries. And for that, the corporate world needs to step up and channel critical finance to those areas. And hence, these claims and also the activity beyond value chain mitigation is a tool for you to demonstrate that you support the global net zero transition. And as a unifying thread of success, if you take only one thought from this webinar today, it should be radical transparency. This is basically the rule of thumb. This is the foundational criteria of building credible climate claims. This is what we are moving towards, and we engage and encourage companies to internalize. And we are really happy to exchange on it and looking forward to your Q&As. But before that, let's hear more about the Funding Climate Action label from Caroline.
Thank you very much, Kata, and hi everyone. Very happy to be here today and to introduce you to our new Funding Climate Action label. And to continue where Kata just left off, it's an applicable solution to champion credible climate action and radical transparency. The label supports you to align your sustainability efforts with the goal of the Paris Agreement and puts you on the pathway to net zero emissions. And on top of that, it is providing a framework to fund global climate action, accelerating global net zero, and building on the SBTi's beyond value chain mitigation guidance. Next slide, please. Yeah, for many years now, South Pole advertises best practice credible climate action and works together with businesses around the globe towards a low carbon reality. And the South Pole climate journey, as displayed on this slide, is our solution to such climate action. And labels play a very important part in this last step of the climate journey, communicate, and lead. They allow you to proudly indicate both internally and externally that you have progressed through a comprehensive process and that you're taking credible action on climate change. This last step of the climate journey is really a moment to celebrate, a moment when you finally see the return on your investment, on the efforts that you have taken along the way. So at this last step, the benefit of doing the right thing becomes very clear. And with that said, let me introduce you to Flo and Joe, who have already had the opportunity to experience our new funding climate action label. So as we have seen from the video, our label is available for companies and products. And I'm very happy to announce that we have recently launched a Funding Climate Action label also for events. So in the spirit of the video, if your event has a climate story to tell, get the label and tell it well. On the next slide, we're going to see what's in it for you. Our Funding Climate Action label is a marker of quality. It illustrates that you're taking responsibility for your missions and went through a comprehensive process to ensure credible climate action within and beyond your value chain. With the help of a personalized landing page that is accessible via the label's QR code, the label sets up a framework to display your climate action directly to your stakeholders. And by doing so, empower them to make purchasing decisions with their own environmental values in mind. And the third pillar is all about business value. Our Funding Climate Action label helps you to create trust among your stakeholder. It supports you to differentiate your business, win over a wave of environmental conscious consumers, and strengthen their brand loyalty. But not only this, the Funding Climate Action label also meets the expectations of the global climate community for accelerated global climate action and greater transparency. So this broad approval shall empower you to go further, to increase your ambition and accelerate your own climate journey. Next slide, please. Having developed a label providing instant and full transparency has allowed us to bring our purpose of climate action for all to life. To help you embark or accelerate on your climate journey, we have developed minimum and best practice requirements for each of the steps of the climate journey. And your level of achievement per step is displayed on the personalized landing page. Continuous improvement is a prerequisite for label qualification. And this transparency approach shall inspire our label holders to take ambitious climate action and to allow those that have already taken these steps to celebrate their achievements. Next slide, please. Our best practice requirements are in line with the latest best practice standards in the market. We expect label holders to measure their full scope of emissions in line with best practice methodologies, to set emission reduction targets in line with science, and to show corresponding progress, moving towards organizational net zero. And on top of that, to fund global climate action, matching the scale of all unabated emissions, and by doing so, contributing to global net zero emissions. Label holders must allow the publication of all relevant information regarding all of these steps that I've just presented on their personalized landing page. And as already mentioned, continuous improvement is a prerequisite for label renewal, and best practice has to be met latest within 3 to 5 years. Next slide, please. When we were deciding on this new direction of travel, this new label and the just presented underlying methodology, we gathered feedback from NGOs, from clients, and also from consumers worldwide. So you don't have to take our word for it, but let me share with you the feedback that we have received from your consumers. From 1,500 consumers, 82% said that they knew immediately what the label stands for, that the landing page made them feel well informed, and that they trust that credible climate action has been taken. And on top of that, 84% of end consumers would even be more likely to buy a product if it had the label on it. While being aware of regional differences regarding the perception of climate labels, we have conducted this study in markets with rigorous regulations and heightened scrutiny. And we do believe these latest developments to be indicative of global trend. Therefore, we'd like to encourage all of you to benefit from the learnings of the last years and rally behind this new direction of travel. And with this, let me hand over to Luc.
Hi, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank our panelists for their presentations, and in particular, Amelia Tan joining from CDP. And would like to move now to the Q&A part of this webinar. We've received quite a few questions, which is great, I guess, because then we can get into details more. I would like to start with a question which is asking a bit more detail about green reversing. I think it's Kata, you would be the best position to answer that question. The question is very much, could we explain once again what the term green reversing means?
Yeah, for sure, and thanks, Victor, for the question. So basically, the green reversing means that a company had a target or a claim or a commitment. Let's say net zero by 2040, climate neutral by 2025. And because these commitments were done a couple of years before their target years, a lot has changed since then. Companies might have realized that the journey leading up towards fulfilling their commitments is harder or slower than they anticipated. So what they do is backtracking from those original commitments, and then they say, for example, I won't credibly and transparently reach net zero by 2040, but what I can commit to today, based on my knowledge, expertise, resources today, is that I am gonna get there by 2050. So what we see is that a little bit of lightening maybe from climate commitments, but in a way that's an act of transparency. So we do believe that being transparent and vulnerable about the challenges around the journey is the right thing to do. Don't stick to your ambitions once you know for sure that you are not going to be able to fulfill them. Step up and transparently recognize and acknowledge the challenges. And we've seen a couple of companies doing this in the course of this year, and the feedback was really positive, acknowledging and valuing transparency above catch all or very ambitious commitment. I hope I could give more context to this term.
Thank you very much, Kata. And moving over to the second question, and that question is, climate neutrality claims have been prone to greenwashing. Do you suggest moving away from them? And this is a question I would like to put to Kata and Amelie.
Yeah, maybe I can start by saying that we do see countries where there is, for example, regulation or a government standard on climate neutrality. For example, in Australia, you can get comply with a government standard, or in France, there is a law put forth regulating climate or carbon neutrality claims. And in those countries, and the number of countries will rise in the future, in those countries we believe companies should comply with regulation, or they should comply with evolving standard. For example, ISO is working on a standard related to carbon neutrality, expected to come out later this year. So whenever possible, comply with existing regulation or standards. And if there is none in your region or in your country, just for the sake of scrutiny, we invite companies to move away from the term, really make it clear when they talk about their decarbonization journey and when they talk about funding climate action, and champion much more transparent and straightforward and credible claims on the way. Amelie, I don't know if you would add your perspective to this question.
Thank you, Kata. And I really like what you said about radical transparency and vulnerability, because I think companies a lot of companies are trying to do what they can, do the best that they can, and sometimes we need to evaluate what is meant by best, right? So for SBTI, the best is really listening to the scientists, like understanding what is really required, to help us prevent, warming to go beyond 1.5 degrees. And you mentioned government efforts, right? So right now, if we look at carbon action tracker, they keep track of all the existing regulations and policies in place, and that actually puts us at 2.7 degree warming. And I think the CEO of AXA insurance company once said, anything above 4 degrees is uninsurable. So how can we close that gap, right? So I think the gap really needs to be closed by the real economy, companies with the scale of operations, with the influence of industry to kind of step in and kind of reduce, kind of slow down the rate at which we burn through our carbon budget. And this carbon neutrality was initially kind of related to a lot of offsetting schemes, right? So I think that's why there was that negativity that was linked to greenwashing and all the climate litigation examples that you list. And I think what companies need to realize is that having credible claims is one thing, but another thing to think about is really investing in the green capex and pivoting your business, really transforming your businesses, to actually be able to meet those claims and targets. And that is the difficult part, right? So I have a lot of companies that come to me to ask, how can I reduce my emissions if my company is looking to grow? And this is almost like an existential question for a lot of companies that want to do more for the planet, but also want to stay profitable, right? And the thing is, companies need to start rethinking what is meant by growth. And there's been a lot of studies that show that those firms with very good ESG strategies actually do better in the long term financially. And also, looking at the frameworks that I talked about earlier on aligning with, say, TCFD, understanding and pricing your risk related to climate impacts will help, companies to understand how much risk exists in their value chain. So yeah, so sorry, this is such a long answer, but this is just to say that, you know, the devil is really in the detail, you know. So that radical transparency, going back to what you said, Kata, is really essential. So yeah, I think it's not really just about what companies claim, but also what they back up the claim with. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kata and Emily. Moving on to another question. What is actually the difference between the funding climate action claim and the label? And I would like to put this question again to Kata.
Yeah. So the claim itself is basically a narrative, a language that we propose for the industry to rally behind, to really, again, just repeating myself, make that clear distinction when it comes to focusing on or talking about their beyond value chain mitigation activities versus when they talk about the reduction activities. And this is really a terminology, a language that's open source. So that's for anyone to endorse and internalize, to be able to be more transparent and credible. And the label itself is basically the verified process behind the claim. Many of you might know and might be aware of third-party verifications versus self-proclaiming claims. We do advise companies to really follow a thorough third-party verification process when it comes to their climate claims. And through the label, South Pole is offering that verification, and together with the company, we sort of put our stance of quality and credibility on the journey that the company has fulfilled and reported. So that's basically the main difference.
Thank you, Kata. And which brings me to a fourth question. There are so many labels available. Why is the funding climate action label the best? And I think Carolyn, you would be in the best position to answer that question.
Sure, Mark, thank you very much. It's a nice question. So the funding climate action label is responding to a global call to action. On the one hand, we have the leading global climate community who is asking for accelerated climate finance and corporate action. And on the other hand, we have climate conscious consumers who want more than just promises when it comes to companies' efforts in tackling climate crisis. And the funding climate action label is offering a solution to this call to action by providing companies with a tool to accelerate their climate action within and beyond their value chain, and helps them to credibly and transparently talk about this action without misleading or greenwashing. So the label is a future-proof tool designed to withstand scrutiny. I hope this answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carolyn. Which is basically the last question I had here, and I would like to remind all participants that we have still a bit of time left. So if there's any questions still there, please pop them up in the chat. And what I also would like to do is make people aware of that South was gonna publish a corporate claims report, a 2023 corporate claims report. For everybody that has joined the webinar, there's no need to go to our website. We will email it to you. So do expect that email and have that additional report where you can go through. Even myself learned a new bit during this presentation. That was kind of interesting, the insight you shared, Emily, from the CEO of AXA, who made the point that anything above 4 degrees is insurable. So be mindful how you go with your global carbon budget. Interesting point and point of view as well. I don't see any questions popping up anymore. So I would like to end the webinar here and thank everybody for joining today and making some time available in their busy calendars. And looking forward to hear from you all again. Thank you very much.